Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the I Am Not Worthless podcast. Episode 10 is going to be about climate change and its impact on biological systems. A few weeks ago, we discussed why conservation matters, why worrying about that is important, and now I want to switch to the other hot topic one issue, which is climate change. See, when people talk about it, when politicians debate it, it's, oh, what's going to happen in 50 years? What's going to happen for our future children? What's their world going to look like? And the fact is that on a biological level, we are basically ignoring that these organisms, these environments, these predator-prey interactions have been evolving over millions of years with synchronicity. And by going up a few degrees, we are throwing a monkey wrench into the clock mechanism of these organisms. So, migration patterns, feeding habits, mating, all of that has evolved over millions of years, and it's been happening at the temperature that it was. But now that climate change is happening and the temperatures are rising by a few degrees, it's shifting that. It's breaking the synchronicity and creating a biological mismatch. Now, part of the problem is that humans are warm-blooded. We don't need to worry about what the outside temperature is in order for us to survive. We've got climate-controlled buildings, houses, businesses, stores. We drive air-conditioned cars. So if the temperature shifts 1 or 2 degrees Celsius, we don't notice. We go, okay, maybe today's jacket day. Maybe today is a heavier coat day. And that's it. It's not that much of an impact on us. Whereas most of the life on this planet, insects, reptiles, amphibians, plants, bacteria, fungus, fungi, they're cold-blooded, ectothermic. Also, mostly stationary. You don't really see vast migration of these animals or insects or plants. You don't see them migrating to a new location when the weather gets cold. Or when it gets too hot, they don't go to another location. The ambient temperature outside determines all aspects of their life. Their metabolic rate, how they eat, how they fight off disease, how their bodies build the proteins to maintain their existence. So what might seem like to us a minimal, if noticeable, not really noticeable at all change, to these animals, that 2 degrees warmer means, okay, we gotta eat faster, we've gotta get more food, because we're burning more. We're using more energy. And this circles into what is called phenology, which is the study of cyclic and seasonal natural phenomena. Blooming of plants, migration patterns of animals like birds, and also when insects hatch. Now, birds rely on day length, which doesn't really change that much, to know when to migrate north. days getting longer, days getting shorter. However, the food supply for these birds, caterpillar, they emerge based on temperature. So when these birds are migrating, which they've been doing for millions of years at the same relative time every year, when they go north, they're expecting food. They're expecting meals for their kids, for their chicks. And because the planet is getting warmer and these insects are emerging, developing, and leaving faster, the birds are getting there without any food being available. Another example is plants and bees. Bees, they hibernate during winter, emerge when the timing is right. But because our planet is warming, plants are blooming earlier. Now, because the bees are not there, they're not getting pollinated. And because the plants eventually die, the bees emerge and there's no food. So, and like I said during the conservation discussion, it's not just about saving one species or another, it's about saving habitat. Well, again, if you select which species you save, you are ignoring that there is a complex food chain. And so when the lower levels of the food chain have to adjust their schedule because of a warming climate, it's the animals at the top of the food chain that ultimately suffer. And last time I checked, humans are one of the top animals of the food chain. And what this warming planet has done is it's forced species to move their range further and further closer to the poles. Every decade, it's several kilometers. Vast amount of distance. Now, for the species that live on mountains, for animals that live on mountains, their window of comfort and survivability is shifting up, up, up. You can follow that up. The problem is that mountains are not unlimited height. Eventually, you are going to reach the top of the mountain. And then what? Also think about the fact that if every species is moving to the top of the mountain, eventually every species is going to try to survive on the top of the mountain, and there's not enough space there for all of them. Something that I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, the coral bleaching. As temperatures rise in the ocean, coral is having to expel beneficial algae, which is causing them to become bleached and effectively starving them. And when coral reefs are gone, almost a quarter of the ocean life loses its habitat. Think about that. That is a large amount of animals that just from a few degrees of ocean water increasing, to us, like I said, we view it as, oh, that's negligible. Who cares? To these animals, that few degrees is the difference between life and death. Now, another point of emphasis is that tropical species, animals that live in the tropics, their environments don't really fluctuate. They're year-round, the same temperature in January and December as in June and July. So their tolerance for temperature shifts is even smaller than other species, which, again, leads to heat stress and mortality. Now, there are, like I said, there are animals and plants that their range is so large, their tolerability is so huge that they can effectively live anywhere. As we've seen even in our own cities, animals thriving that we thought wouldn't. Raccoons, for example, they're everywhere. Crows. So those generalists are not as big of a concern because they can continue to move. Now, eventually they will run out of places to go, but what we're focusing on and what I'm focusing on are the specialists, the animals and the plants that have specific niches, specific habitats that they have to live in, where if a few degrees happens, it destroys their microclimate. And because we destroy their microclimate, the food web that depends on them, that again I mentioned before, collapses. Because again, these are not isolated species that you can plug and play in different environments, different habitats, and if you take one out, the rest can survive because it's not necessary for that one to be there. Everything that's there has to be there. And why humans should care is because the things that carry our diseases, the vectors of our diseases like mosquitoes, ticks, as the climate gets warmer, their range gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So when you thought, oh, dengue fever, Lyme disease, West Nile, malaria, if I lived in, England or Finland, Russia, Montana, Canada, we don't have to worry about those because it's too cold for them. Well, rising temperatures, expanding range, those are now entering areas that are associated with typically colder climates. Now, we mentioned the quail that needs the prairie grass. Because of the weather, because of the rising temperatures, soils are becoming degraded due to the flood and drought, to now the changing flood and drought. As you have seen and can easily pull up on Weather Channel apps, that droughts are happening more often, floods are happening more frequently in worse situations. Fish are having to move north. That's affecting where the fish stock is, where fishing is happening, where places that maybe during a certain time of year we're fishing one, they're now having to worry about competing with another type of fishing because the temperature in the water is increasing. And these animals are leaving to avoid those rising temperatures. So conservation, climate change, it's not about saving the polar bear, the bald eagle, the bison. It's about understanding that we as humans, are dependent upon ecological services that are provided to us by biological systems that over millions of years have evolved to be in a certain microclimate. So pollination, pest control, disease regulation, ocean food webs, flooding, soil, are all being impacted by just a 2 degree Celsius increase. Negligible Fahrenheit increase. Now, everyone can argue and debate about whether or not climate change is real, it's affected by humans, or they could say it's not. But you cannot argue with the fact, you cannot say that the biological data that we are collecting about migration, about collapsing food webs, about the disease range expanding, about oceans shifting fisheries, that cannot be argued. That's plain as day. And whether we want to believe it or not, whether we want to think about it or not, it's happening. And we can choose to ignore it and suffer the consequences in a few years, or we can fight it and fix it and save it now and make it to where we can survive longer on this planet. That's it for this week's episode of the I Am Not Worth This podcast. Next week, we're going to talk about the math of gambling and risk, and about how you're more likely to lose than win. Thank you so much, and enjoy your weekend. I will see you next week.